No one expected this visit to be different. When news spread that Donald Trump was heading to a veterans medical center, many assumed it would be a routine stop. Shake a few hands, pose for pictures, say a few words about patriotism, and move on. But what happened that day was anything but routine. The air was thick with anticipation as veterans, hospital staff, and military families gathered inside the facility. Some were lifelong Trump supporters, eager to see the man they believed had done more for veterans than most presidents before him. Others were simply curious, unsure of what to expect but willing to listen. And then there were those who had their doubts, veterans who had served, sacrificed, and suffered, skeptical of political figures who made promises but rarely delivered. When Trump finally entered the room, the energy shifted instantly. Love him or hate him, he commanded attention. His presence alone was enough to stir reactions from every corner of the audience. Some clapped enthusiastically, others simply observed, arms crossed, waiting to see what he would do. But instead of immediately taking the stage or diving into a speech, he did something unexpected. He walked straight to the veterans. One by one, he greeted them personally. Not just a passing handshake, not just a quick nod, but a real conversation with each man and woman sitting in those chairs. Some of them were elderly, their bodies weakened by time but their spirits unbreakable. Others were young, warriors still fighting the silent battles of PTSD and physical recovery. Trump listened. He leaned in, asked about their service, their struggles, their families, and for a moment, there were no cameras, no political slogans, just a former president and the men and women who had served their country. Then came the moment that truly changed everything. As he made his way across the room, Trump stopped in front of a Vietnam War veteran, a man in a wheelchair with deep lines on his face and eyes that had seen more than most could ever imagine. The man, initially reserved, looked up at Trump and spoke in a voice filled with quiet strength. "I never thought I'd see a president care this much," he said. His words hung in the air for a second, and then something happened that no one expected. Trump, known for his strong persona, placed a hand on the veteran's shoulder and looked him in the eye. There was no rehearsed response, no grand statement, just a genuine moment of respect. The room fell silent. Even those who had remained skeptical found themselves moved by the sincerity of the exchange. It was in that moment that the visit transformed from a political appearance into something deeply personal. It was no longer about optics or media coverage. It was about something far greater. No one knew it yet, but the most powerful moment of the day was still to come. The room was already filled with emotion, but what happened next took everyone by surprise. As Donald Trump continued speaking with veterans, the conversation shifted from polite exchanges to deeply personal stories. Men who had faced enemy fire, who had lost brothers in combat, who had endured the silent battles of PTSD and physical pain. These were not just statistics or symbols of service. They were living, breathing reminders of the sacrifices made for this country. Trump took the microphone, but instead of delivering a standard political speech, he did something different. He paused, looking around the room, and then he began speaking. Not to the cameras, not to the press, but directly to the veterans. He spoke about his respect for those who served, about the sacrifices they made, and about how too many had been forgotten after their duty was done. His voice, usually bold and commanding, softened as he shared a story about a veteran he had met years ago, a man who had struggled for decades to get the medical care he deserved. "No one should ever have to fight for dignity after they've fought for their country," Trump said. And in that moment, even those who had been skeptical felt something shift. Then, out of nowhere, Trump did something that stunned the room. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a small gold object, a Purple Heart medal. The crowd barely had time to react before he turned toward an older veteran in the front row. The man was a double amputee, his body worn from war but his pride still intact. Trump knelt slightly, looked him in the eyes, and said, "I want you to have this." Gasps filled the air. Veterans who had been hardened by war, who had seen and experienced unimaginable horrors, were visibly emotional. A few wiped their eyes. Others simply stared, as if trying to process what they had just witnessed. The man receiving the medal, overwhelmed, tried to speak, but only managed a quiet, "Thank you, sir." But Trump wasn't done. He turned to the crowd and made a promise. Not a campaign promise, not a political statement, but a personal vow. These men and women deserve the best our country has to offer. We can never truly repay them, but we can make sure they are never forgotten. The applause that followed wasn't just polite, it was thunderous. In that instant, the visit became something far greater than anyone had expected. It was no longer just a former president meeting veterans. It was a powerful, deeply human moment, one that transcended politics. No one could have predicted what came next, because just when it seemed like the most emotional moment had passed, a veteran stood up, his voice shaking with emotion, and said something that would bring the entire room to tears. The room was already thick with emotion, but when the veteran stood up, everything fell silent. He was an older man, his hair grayed with time, but his posture remained strong, a soldier through and through. His voice, though steady, carried the weight of years spent in service, of battles fought both on the field and within himself. "I never thought I'd see this day," he said, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "I never thought I'd stand in front of a president who looked a veteran in the eye and truly listened." His words hung in the air, and for a moment there was no movement, no sound, just the unspoken understanding shared among the men and women who knew exactly what he meant. Others began to speak. A younger Marine, his uniform crisp, stepped forward. He had been wounded in Afghanistan, and though his scars were hidden beneath his clothing, the pain in his voice was unmistakable. "We come home and we're expected to just move on," he said. "But some wounds don't heal. Some nights, I still wake up thinking I'm back there. And for years I felt like no one understood, like no one cared." His voice wavered, but then he looked directly at Trump. "But today, I feel seen." The impact of those words rippled through the crowd. Veterans who had spent years fighting for benefits, for medical care, for simple recognition, now found themselves in a room where their voices weren't just heard. They were valued. A woman, standing near the back, stepped forward next. She wasn't a veteran herself, but the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. "My husband served 3 tours," she said, her voice shaking. "He came home, but he wasn't the same. He tried to push through, to be the man he was before, but—" She stopped, swallowing hard, trying to keep her composure. "He lost his battle last year." A hushed stillness fell over the crowd. She took a breath and continued. "I've spent so much time wondering if anyone even noticed, if his sacrifice even mattered. But hearing what's been said today, seeing this moment, it reminds me that he wasn't forgotten." Trump, uncharacteristically quiet, simply nodded. No grand speech, no political spin, just a moment of silence for a man who had given everything. More stories followed, some about heroism, others about loss. One veteran, who had served in Desert Storm, spoke about the friends he had lost. Another, a medic from Iraq, shared how he still carried the names of fallen soldiers in his pocket, a daily reminder of those who never made it home. Grown men, hardened by war and time, wiped away tears. Even those who had walked into the event with skepticism now stood, united by something far greater than politics, a shared history of sacrifice. And as the last veteran finished speaking, the room wasn't just filled with emotion, it was filled with something even stronger, a renewed sense of honor. What happened next, however, would make this moment even more unforgettable. By the next morning, the entire country was talking about what had happened. News outlets ran headlines that captured the emotion of the moment. Trump's tearful tribute to veterans, a powerful gesture that left the room speechless. Social media exploded with reactions, videos of the event circulating rapidly, showing veterans sharing their stories, tears in their eyes as Donald Trump stood among them, not as a politician, but as a man paying his respects. For Trump's supporters, this was proof of what they had always believed. He was a president who truly cared about America's veterans. Conservative commentators praised the event, calling it one of the most heartfelt moments of his post-presidency years. "Say what you will about Trump, but you cannot deny the respect he showed those men and women," one news anchor remarked. "He didn't just talk, he listened." Veteran groups also responded, many sharing their appreciation for the event and what it symbolized. Some highlighted Trump's past efforts to reform the VA healthcare system, increase funding for military families, and push for better treatment of returning soldiers. Others simply thanked him for showing up, for looking veterans in the eye, for acknowledging their struggles in a way that felt real. But of course, not everyone saw it that way. Mainstream media outlets took a different angle, with some questioning the authenticity of the moment. Headlines like, "Was Trump's emotional veterans tribute just a political move?" and critics accused Trump of using veterans for publicity began to surface. Pundits debated whether his actions were truly heartfelt or just another way to keep himself in the spotlight. This was a well-timed appearance, one commentator argued on national television. Trump knows the power of emotional moments, and he knows how to use them. The political divide was clear. While many saw the event as a rare, powerful display of unity and gratitude, others dismissed it as nothing more than a carefully staged moment. Some critics even suggested that the veterans' emotional responses were exaggerated, an accusation that angered many who had been there firsthand. Social media became a battleground. Videos of Trump handing the Purple Heart to a veteran went viral, with thousands praising his actions. "This is the America we need," one tweet read. But right alongside it were posts from skeptics, accusing him of playing to his base and questioning the true impact of his past promises to veterans. Yet, despite the debates, one thing was clear. This visit had struck a nerve. It wasn't just another political appearance. It wasn't just another speech. Something about the raw, unfiltered emotion of that day had made it impossible to ignore. And whether people supported Trump or not, whether they saw sincerity or strategy, the impact of that moment was undeniable. But the biggest question remained: what would happen next? Would this visit lead to real change, or would it become just another story lost in the endless cycle of news and politics? That answer would depend on what came after. Long after the cameras stopped rolling and the media moved on to the next big headline, the impact of Trump's visit lingered. For the veterans in that room, this wasn't just another public appearance. It was a rare moment where their sacrifices weren't just acknowledged, but deeply felt. It was a reminder that their service, their pain, and their struggles mattered. For many of these men and women, life after service hadn't been easy. Some had come home to a country that didn't seem to understand what they had been through. Others had battled years of red tape just to get the medical care and benefits they were promised. And far too many had fought internal battles, silent struggles with PTSD, depression, and the feeling of being left behind by the very nation they once risked their lives for. That's what made this moment different. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about whether you agreed or disagreed with Trump's policies. It was about respect. When he handed that Purple Heart to the veteran, when he stood in that room and listened to their stories, he did something that many in power had failed to do. He made them feel seen. And for some of these veterans, that meant more than anything else. There was something deeply personal about Trump's connection to the military. His respect for the armed forces had been a defining part of his presidency, from increasing VA funding to signing laws aimed at improving veteran health care. But beyond the policies, beyond the speeches, moments like this visit showed why his supporters believed he truly cared. For many conservatives, this was exactly the kind of leadership they admired. Not flashy promises, not scripted appearances, but real, unscripted moments of connection. The kind of leadership that wasn't afraid to stand in front of veterans, some supportive, some skeptical, and hear them out. But this moment wasn't just about Trump. It was about every American who has forgotten what our veterans go through. The ones who turn a blind eye to the struggles of those who served. The ones who assume a pat on the back is enough, while countless veterans sleep on the streets, suffer in silence, or spend years fighting a system that should have taken care of them from day one. This event was a reminder that honoring veterans isn't about political affiliations or photo ops. It's about action. It's about making sure that when the parades are over and the speeches end, these men and women are still supported, still cared for, still remembered. And that's where the real challenge lies. Would this powerful moment lead to real change? Would it inspire more people to step up for those who had given everything? Or would it, like so many other emotional moments, fade into memory as just another story? The answer wasn't up to Trump. It was up to all of us. As the days passed, the moment continued to resonate. The headlines faded, the social media debates shifted. But for the veterans who had been in that room, something had changed. For many of them, this wasn't just another event to shake hands and exchange pleasantries. It was a moment of recognition, a rare instance where they weren't just thanked for their service, but truly heard. The veteran who received the Purple Heart? He later told reporters that it was one of the most meaningful gestures he had ever experienced. "I don't care what side of politics you're on," he said. In that moment, I knew he respected us, and that's all we've ever wanted. Stories like his began to spread. Other veterans who had attended the event spoke about how much it meant to them, not just because of Trump, but because of what it represented. A reminder that their sacrifices weren't forgotten, that their pain, their struggles, and their years of service still mattered to someone in power. But the real question remained: would this moment lead to real change? Trump had already made veteran support a key part of his political legacy, from expanding healthcare options for former service members to reforming the VA system. But this visit, this raw and emotional display of respect, had reignited a conversation about how America treats its heroes. Advocacy groups took notice. Calls for better health care, faster benefits processing, and increased mental health support for veterans gained renewed traction. Some lawmakers, inspired by the event, pushed for new legislation to further assist struggling veterans. It was proof that one moment of true connection can spark something much bigger. Still, the fight for veterans' rights was far from over. Homelessness, suicide rates, lack of proper medical care, these were ongoing battles that no single event could solve overnight. But if nothing else, Trump's visit had brought attention to an issue that too often gets overlooked. And maybe that was the most important takeaway of all: that honoring veterans isn't just about speeches, ceremonies, or one-time gestures. It's about action. It's about making sure that when the cameras leave and the headlines change, the commitment to those who served remains. So the question isn't just what Trump will do next. The question is, what will we do? Will we continue to demand better for our veterans? Will we fight to make sure that their sacrifices are truly honored, not just with words but with action? Because if this event proved anything, it's that respecting our heroes isn't a political issue. It's an American duty. And it's up to all of us to make sure that duty is never forgotten. Moments like this remind us of a simple truth: honoring our veterans isn't about politics. It's about gratitude, respect, and action. These men and women have sacrificed everything for this country, but far too many are still struggling long after their service ends. So here's the real question: what can we do to support our heroes? Whether it's raising awareness, donating to veteran charities, or simply thanking a veteran in your own community, every action matters. Drop a comment below with your thoughts, share this message, and let's make sure our veterans are never forgotten, not just today, but every day.